Two officers, convinced by a mere resemblance, sought to humiliate a man. What they overlooked was Keenan Rucker's history of true battles, a track record that meant losing this one simply wasn't an option. Life presents pivotal moments unannounced that test your very core. For Keenan, that moment ignited on a sweltering Saturday afternoon, just outside Grady's Hardware in Bismarck, North Dakota. Keenan's mind was on simple errands, garden gloves, a hose nozzle potting soil, a list his mom had texted. He was dressed casually, post-jog, dark gym shorts, a hoodie, sneakers still dusty from the trail. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing to suspect. But the instant he nudged open the heavy glass door, his world seemed to twist. "Hey, halt right there," a voice bellowed. Keenan barely registered the command before two officers rapidly converged. Deputy Wade Carlson, a hefty man with a sun-scorched face and a perpetual scowl, seized Keenan's shoulder, hard enough to yank his hoodie askew. Officer Brent Marbury, younger but equally aggressive, moved to block the entrance. Keenan instinctively raised his hands, palms open. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "You know damn well." Carlson snapped. Without another word, he slammed Keenan against the brick wall outside, the loud smack echoing across the parking lot. Heads turned, families loading trunks, a teenager on a bike, even an elderly man with a cart of soil bags. Keenan didn't resist. It wasn't how he was trained. "You're mistaken," he stated evenly. Marbury mumbled, yanking Keenan's arms back and cinching the cuffs tight, too tight. "Got yourself caught this time, huh?" "Caught doing what?" Keenan hadn't even stepped inside. A woman in a sundress froze by her minivan, eyes wide. A teen pulled out his phone. An older couple whispered. People watched, but no one intervened. "ID in my back pocket," Keenan said, his voice low. Carlson ignored him. "You fit the description," he barked, dragging Keenan toward their cruiser. "What description?" Keenan pressed. "You haven't even checked." Carlson let out a short, nasty laugh. "Don't need to. You're it." Marbury chuckled too, as if it were a private joke. They shoved him into the back seat without a word, the door slamming shut, a final insult. Keenan sat, staring straight ahead, his heart pounding not from fear but from a deep, slow anger. The kind that surfaces when you realize that despite all you've given, all you've proven in their eyes, you were nothing. The squad car idled for a long moment. Then a call crackled over the radio. "Wrong guy. Suspect already apprehended across town." No hoodie, no gym shorts, no resemblance at all. Carlson cursed under his breath. Marbury's face flushed crimson. Without a word, they yanked open the door and uncuffed Keenan right there in the parking lot. No apology, no explanation. "Get out of here." Carlson barked as if Keenan were a troublesome stray. Keenan rose slowly, rubbing his wrists. He locked eyes with them, steady, unwavering. "You'll hear from me," he stated simply. Carlson snorted. Marbury looked away. Keenan turned, walking back towards the hardware store entrance where people still stared, some whispering, others pretending they hadn't seen a thing. He took a cart with steady hands, rolled it to the garden section and began ticking off his list. Gloves, hose nozzle, soil. Business as usual, at least on the surface. But something had shifted deep inside him, and he knew his next move wouldn't be silent. Keenan finished his shopping, but it felt mechanical. His body moved, grabbing items, steering the cart, responding to the cashier with polite nods. But his mind was on a different track entirely, the kind that clenches your jaw without you realizing it. As he loaded the soil bags into his trunk, the sting in his wrists flared with every flex of his hands. Those cuffs hadn't been slapped on by mistake. They were put on with malice. He glanced once across the parking lot. The officers were gone, but the memory of it hung there, thick and ugly. "Keenan." A voice called out. He turned to see Mr. Dalton, the retired Army vet who ran the pawnshop 2 doors down. Gray crew-cut, faded jeans, always smelling faintly of coffee and sawdust. "You okay, son?" Dalton asked, concern etched across his face. Keenan forced a small smile. "Yeah, Mr. Dalton. Just a little misunderstanding." Dalton frowned. "Didn't look like no misunderstanding from where I was standing." Keenan didn't answer. He wasn't ready for a conversation, not yet. He gave a small shrug as if it didn't matter. Dalton narrowed his eyes. "Don't let them boys walk all over you." "Not you." Keenan nodded slightly. I won't. Dalton gave him a firm pat on the shoulder and headed back to his shop. It was a small moment, but it stuck. He drove home in silence. No music, no news. Just the hum of the tires against the asphalt and the simmering thought that something had to be done. Not with fists, not with shouting, but with something they couldn't ignore. Pulling into his driveway, Keenan parked the truck and sat there for a moment, keys still in the ignition. His neighborhood was quiet. Little two-story houses, kids' bikes abandoned, sprinklers ticking on front lawns. Normal. Safe. Or at least it should have been. Inside, his mom, Francine Rucker, called from the kitchen. "That you, baby?" "Yeah, Ma," he said, slipping off his sneakers by the door. She popped her head around the corner, wiping her hands on a towel. "You get everything?" He smiled for real this time, tired but genuine. "Yeah, got it all." She studied him for a beat longer than necessary. Mothers knew things without needing to ask. "You sure you're all right?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then nodded. "Just tired." She didn't push, just gave him a look that said she was there if he needed to talk. After dinner, after the dishes were washed, after the house settled into its nighttime rhythms, Keenan found himself standing in front of the hall closet. The one where he kept the things that still felt too close to let go of. His army dress uniform, polished boots, his medals neatly pinned to a velvet board. He reached for the uniform with steady hands. Tomorrow, he thought, tomorrow would be different. He laid everything out carefully on his bed. Jacket, pants, white gloves, ribbons aligned in perfect rows. The combat infantryman badge caught the light from his bedside lamp, shining like a reminder. You earned your place. You fought for it. This wasn't about getting revenge. It wasn't about making a scene. It was about showing them who he really was and making sure they would never forget. He sat down heavily in the chair by the window, watching the street lights flicker on, one by one. His reflection stared back at him from the dark glass. Tired eyes, squared shoulders. A man who had faced worse things than this and come through stronger. Keenan wasn't the kind of man to act on anger. He believed in order, in principle. But respect wasn't something you begged for. It was something you demanded without ever raising your voice. He leaned back, letting the chair creak under his weight, and closed his eyes. Tomorrow they would see him, not through suspicion, not through ignorance, but through undeniable truth. And no amount of badge or bluster would cover up the mistake they made. But for that to happen, he had to be ready for every eye in town to be on him. Morning arrived, heavy, dragging a thin layer of gray across the sky. Keenan was already up when the first hint of light pushed through the curtains. He hadn't slept much, not out of anger, but focus. His mind had been busy, drawing the map of what needed to happen. By 6:30 he was buttoning up his dress blues, the fabric stiff and familiar under his fingertips. Each piece went on like armor. The pressed pants, the tailored jacket, the brass shining against deep navy cloth. His combat infantryman badge sat just above his ribbons, small, simple, heavy with meaning. In the hallway mirror he adjusted his tie until it sat perfectly straight, then he slipped his boots on, polished so clean they almost looked like glass. Downstairs, Francine stood by the coffee maker, watching him with silent pride and something else, a trace of worry. "You sure about this?" she asked, handing him a travel mug. Keenan took it, nodded once. "It's the only way they'll listen." Francine's mouth tightened, but she didn't argue. She simply pressed her palm to his chest, right over the medals. "You walk in there like the man you are. Make them see it." "I will." He pulled the door closed behind him, the click of the latch sounding sharper than usual. It wasn't just another trip into town. It was a reckoning. The drive to the sheriff's department was short. Bismarck wasn't a huge city, just big enough to feel like you could disappear in it if you weren't careful. As he turned onto Avenue C, the squat brick building came into view. The flag out front fluttered in the cool morning air. Keenan parked 2 spaces from the entrance. He cut the engine, sat for a beat, breathing slow and steady. The uniform's weight felt good, grounding. A few people were milling around outside. A man with a clipboard, 2 women unlocking bikes from a rack. They barely glanced his way at first, just another day. But when Keenan opened the truck door and stepped out, something shifted. Conversations stuttered to a stop. Heads turned. Eyes followed. He adjusted his gloves, straightened his shoulders, and walked toward the entrance without rushing. Every step was deliberate, every breath was measured. Inside, the lobby buzzed softly with phones ringing and low voices. A young deputy behind the desk looked up and froze, eyes snapping wide. "Can I help you, sir?" the deputy asked, voice suddenly stiff. Keenan removed his hat, tucked it neatly under his arm. "I'm here to file a formal complaint," he said, his voice even. The deputy swallowed hard. Chief Bowden's inside." "Oh, I'll let him know." Keenan nodded once and stepped aside, standing tall in the middle of the lobby. Within minutes, civilians started trickling in behind him. A woman paying a traffic ticket, a man asking about a building permit. Each of them paused when they saw him. Some whispered. One woman pulled out her phone, pretending to scroll but clearly recording. The chief came out 5 minutes later, a wiry man with thinning hair and tired eyes. He took one look at Keenan's uniform and went pale. "Morning," Keenan said coolly. "Morning," Chief Bowden replied, voice cracking slightly. "Let's step into my office." "In a moment," Keenan said. He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his inner jacket pocket. "I'm filing an official complaint against Deputy Wade Carlson and Officer Brent Marbury. Assault, wrongful arrest, civil rights violation." The chief's hand shook as he reached for the paper. "Understood," he muttered. And Keenan continued, letting his words fill the room. "I expect a full investigation. Transparent. Public." The chief nodded quickly, almost bowing. The deputy at the desk stared, red creeping up his neck. People kept watching, recording, whispering. And Keenan stood there like a monument to every wrong they had tried to erase. He turned, placed his hat back on his head and walked out without waiting for permission. The bright sun outside hit him square in the face, but he didn't flinch. The day had only just begun and the town was already buzzing. But Keenan knew this was just the first crack in the dam, and once the truth started leaking, there'd be no stopping the flood. The phones inside the sheriff's department didn't stop ringing after Keenan left. By noon, what had started as whispers in the lobby turned into full-blown conversations on Main Street, at gas stations, in barber shops. Words spread faster than the chief could contain it. At Darla's diner down the road, folks hunched over their coffee cups and muttered his name. "You see what he was wearing? Looked like a damn general walking in there. About time somebody stood up to them." Meanwhile, Keenan went home and waited. He didn't need to shout or chase reporters. The truth was moving on its own now, like a slow, unstoppable tide. By late afternoon, local news vans started popping up around town like mushrooms after rain. One station out of Fargo sent a reporter, Jessica Mullins, straight to Bismarck to cover the story. Young, sharp, and hungry, Jessica wasn't the type to let a good lead slip away. Keenan answered her call politely but firmly. "I'll give my statement after the department responds officially. Not before." The reporter agreed, and the tone of her voice said she respected him more for it. At the station, Chief Bowden sat in his office with his head in his hands. Deputy Carlson paced back and forth like a caged animal, while Officer Marbury stared at the floor, pale as a sheet. "They're making a circus out of this," Carlson muttered, slamming a fist into his palm. "He ain't even hurt," Marbury said weakly. Chief Bowden snapped his head up. "You laid hands on a man without checking ID. You cuffed a decorated Army veteran in front of half the town, and now you want to whine that he ain't hurt." Neither man answered. A knock came at the door. It was the mayor's assistant, red-faced and sweating. "Mayor wants to see you," she said to Bowden. "Right now." The chief cursed under his breath but stood. He knew what was coming. Pressure, questions, demands. And from the way the assistant kept shifting from foot to foot, it was obvious the mayor wasn't looking for excuses. He was looking for heads to roll. Out in the parking lot, a crowd was beginning to form. Some held signs hastily scrawled on cardboard. "Justice for Keenan. We stand with our veterans. Respect is earned." It wasn't just black folks either. Old ranchers, teenagers in baseball caps, moms with toddlers balanced on their hips. The town had seen injustice up close, and for once they weren't pretending they hadn't. Keenan's old high school principal, Mr. Landers, even showed up and spoke to a reporter. "Keenan Rucker was one of the finest young men I ever taught," Landers said, his voice tight with emotion. "What happened to him yesterday? It's a disgrace to this town." Every word landed like a hammer. Inside, Carlson and Marbury sat in a small back room, listening through the thin walls. Every chant, every angry voice outside hit them harder than any court summons ever could. "You think they'll fire us?" Marbury finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Carlson didn't answer. He knew they were done and there wasn't a badge big enough to shield them from it. Meanwhile, Keenan stayed home, sitting at the kitchen table with his mother, eating a plate of baked chicken and green beans like it was any other Sunday. "You proud of yourself?" Francine asked, smiling softly. Keenan shrugged. "Just did what needed doing." Francine reached over and squeezed his hand. "You did it with dignity. That's what matters." Out the window, they could see the lights of the news vans blinking down the street like distant stars. Keenan didn't look too long, he didn't need the spotlight. The important part, the real part, had already happened. He stood up. He made them look him in the eye. But tomorrow was still coming, and with it the real test. Would the system fix itself or just bury the embarrassment and pretend nothing had happened? By Monday morning, the small town of Bismarck felt a little less small. National outlets had picked up the story. First local affiliates, then bigger names like Channel 7 News and even a piece on a morning talk show. Keenan's face, standing tall in his uniform, flashed across millions of television screens. Nobody cared about the hardware store anymore. The real story was simpler. 2 officers humiliated an Army veteran on American soil and people were furious. Outside the sheriff's department, the protest had doubled overnight. Folks brought lawn chairs, coolers, poster boards. Some carried American flags not as a weapon but as a reminder. A local preacher named Reverend Cyrus Dalton stood with a megaphone, not shouting, just speaking clear and calm to the crowd. "When one of our own is treated like less," he said, "we are all treated like less." Keenan stayed home. He wasn't hiding, he simply didn't want to feed the media circus. His phone rang off the hook, calls from old Army buddies, former teachers, even strangers from other towns. One message stuck with him: "You reminded us what quiet strength looks like. Thank you." Meanwhile, inside the sheriff's office, the walls were closing in. Chief Bowden had no choice. He placed both Deputy Wade Carlson and Officer Brent Marbury on administrative leave, pending an external investigation. The announcement was read stiffly at a hastily called press conference where the chief looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "We take these allegations seriously," he said, the cameras catching every nervous glance. Behind him, a representative from the state's Office of Professional Standards stood like a shadow, arms crossed. Reporters threw questions like fastballs. Why weren't IDs checked? Will the officers face criminal charges? How can residents trust this department after what happened? Bowden's answers were vague and unsatisfying. One woman in the back called out, "Would you have cuffed him if he was in uniform?" The room fell silent. Bowden didn't answer. He didn't have to. Outside, the crowd roared louder, signs bouncing in the air. Kids climbed up on their dads' shoulders to see. Elderly couples leaned on each other, shaking their heads in disgust. At home, Keenan sat with Francine on the porch, sipping sweet tea. "You could probably run for mayor after this," she joked. Keenan laughed, a short, real laugh that he hadn't felt in a while. "Not my thing," he said. "I'm not looking to be anyone's hero." "You already are," Francine said. Cars honked as they drove by. People waved. Neighbors dropped off pies, casseroles, envelopes stuffed with thank you notes. It was overwhelming, but Keenan accepted it all with the same quiet dignity that had carried him through that awful moment outside the hardware store. Later that night, sitting alone in the living room, he flipped through the local news channels. Footage of him standing in the sheriff's lobby played again and again. He didn't look angry in the video. He looked still, like a man who didn't need to shout to be heard. Meanwhile, commentators debated on air. "This isn't just about one man," a panelist said. "This is about a pattern, and it's about respect." Another added, "When someone like Staff Sergeant Rucker is treated like this, it reminds every veteran and every citizen that their service can be erased by ignorance in a heartbeat." The conversation wasn't just about Keenan anymore. It was about the bigger picture. People were asking hard questions and refusing to let them be brushed aside. But Keenan knew attention could be a double-edged sword, and the real challenge would be making sure this didn't just fade away once the cameras packed up. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. 3 days after the public outcry hit its peak, Deputy Wade Carlson and Officer Brent Marbury were officially suspended without pay, pending termination hearings. It wasn't just the pressure from the town. Veterans organizations from all across North Dakota flooded City Hall with letters, phone calls, and emails demanding real accountability. A group of retired Marines even drove in from Minot, holding a silent vigil outside the station for 24 hours straight, their dress uniforms stiff and immaculate under the sun. Keenan watched it all unfold from a distance, not because he didn't care, but because he knew the spotlight could twist a man if he wasn't careful. He agreed to sit down with Jessica Mullins from Channel 7 for one interview only. Nothing flashy, no dramatics, just him, his words, and the truth. The interview took place at Memorial Park, under the old oak trees near the Veterans Monument. Keenan wore jeans and a simple black t-shirt. No uniform this time. He didn't need it. Jessica asked the first question carefully. When they grabbed you, what was going through your mind? Keenan paused, looking out over the green lawn. I wasn't thinking about myself, he said finally. I was thinking about all the times people don't get the chance to prove who they are. About all the ones who never get the benefit of the doubt. Jessica nodded slowly. What do you want people to take away from this? Keenan looked directly into the camera, voice steady. Respect isn't something you hand out only when it's convenient, he said. It's something you owe to every person you meet, no matter what they look like, where they come from, or what you think you know about them. The segment aired that night. No dramatic music, no flashing graphics, just Keenan's words, simple and strong. And people listened. A few days later, the mayor issued a formal apology during a town hall meeting. He called Keenan a pillar of strength and promised reforms within the sheriff's department, including mandatory bias training and community oversight panels. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't fix everything. But it was a start. At the same meeting, Francine Rucker stood up during the Q&A session. My son didn't ask for any of this, she said, her voice ringing clear. He didn't need a crowd behind him. He didn't need a camera in his face. All he needed was the same basic respect anyone deserves. The room went silent. Keenan, sitting 3 rows back, bowed his head for a moment. He didn't cry, he didn't smile. He just let the weight of it settle, the way you do when you know something real has finally been said out loud. Later that week, Mr. Dalton from the pawnshop caught up with him outside Grady's Hardware, where the whole mess had started. You did good, son, Dalton said, holding out a hand. Keenan shook it firmly. Still a long way to go. Dalton nodded. Maybe. But you moved the line. That counts. Keenan watched as Dalton crossed the parking lot, whistling under his breath, nodding at passers-by. Small moments. Tiny shifts. Change didn't come in a rush. It came in pieces. A look, a handshake, a conversation started where before there was only silence. As he climbed into his truck, Keenan thought about everything that had happened, about the hand that had slammed him against a wall, about the faces that had looked the other way, about the voices that finally spoke up. Respect. It wasn't given because of medals or uniforms. It was supposed to be there from the start. And when it wasn't, well, sometimes you had to stand there calm and steady and force the world to see you as you were. But Keenan knew his story wasn't just about a fight won. It was about making sure nobody had to fight the same battle alone, ever again. Days passed, then a week. The noise faded as it always does. The cameras packed up, the news vans left. Even the crowds thinned, returning to the rhythm of small-town life. But something stayed different in Bismarck. It wasn't just the policies being rewritten or the mandatory trainings rolled out across the department. It was quieter than that. Deeper. People made more eye contact at the grocery store. Strangers nodded a little slower, a little more deliberately. Kids learned his name in school not because he had done something violent, but because he stood his ground with quiet strength. Keenan noticed it in small ways. At the post office, an elderly woman he'd never met pressed a thank you card into his hand without saying a word. At the gas station, the clerk who once never looked up from his register now said, "Good morning, Sergeant Rucker," every time he came through. The world hadn't changed overnight, but it had shifted just enough to feel it. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned the color of burnt gold, Keenan stood in Memorial Park again. He wasn't wearing a uniform or a suit, just jeans, boots, and a plain gray sweatshirt. He watched a group of kids laughing as they chased each other across the grass, their worries light as feathers. Across the street, Reverend Dalton was closing up his church, giving Keenan a wave before disappearing inside. Francine joined him a few minutes later, 2 coffees in hand. "Thought you might want one," she said, handing him a cup. He smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "Thanks, Ma." They sat on the bench for a long while, saying nothing, just watching the town breathe. "You regret any of it?" she asked eventually. Keenan shook his head. Not a bit. Francine sipped her coffee. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for all of us. Folks who never had the words or the chance. Keenan didn't answer right away. He just let the weight of her words settle. Heavy but good. You can't change people's hearts overnight, he said finally. But you can show them what respect looks like. You can hold up a mirror and make them look at themselves. Francine smiled. And sometimes that's enough to start something bigger. They watched the sky fade to darker blues, the first stars peeking out. Keenan thought about the men who had slapped those cuffs on him, thought about how easy it would have been to lash out, to match hate with rage. But he hadn't. Because dignity wasn't just something you demanded. It was something you carried inside you even when no one else recognized it. And that's what made all the difference. As they finished their coffee, Keenan stood, stretching his back. Tomorrow would be another day. More work to do. More lessons to teach. Not by shouting but by living the truth every step of the way. Before heading back to the truck, he turned to the empty park, the darkening town and the open sky. Respect, he said under his breath, starts here. And he touched a hand to his chest, right over the place where all the years, all the lessons, all the battles he'd fought, seen and unseen, still lived. Life will always throw you moments where you have a choice. React with anger or respond with strength. Respect isn't just earned. It's demanded through the way you carry yourself even when no one's looking. If this story resonated with you, take a second to reflect on the kind of world you're helping to build with your words, your actions, your silence. And if you believe in standing up for dignity, even when it's hard, hit that subscribe button and share this story. Let's be the difference together.